Hi, welcome to Give Book, Give Voice. Today we'll be reading Captured, an American Prisoner of the War in North Vietnam by Alvin Townley. Chapter 1. Capture. Jerry stood at his shipboard desk and slipped off the U.S. Naval Academy ring. Class of 1947, it read. 19 years and 2 months had passed since the ceremony where he genuinely tossed his hat into the air with his classmates and became a naval officer. Between this day and the graduation, Sunday, July 18th, 1965, he had married his high school sweetheart and fathered 7 children. And in just 2 days, he would realize his dream of commanding an Air Force squadron at war. He placed his ring in a drawer. Next to the ring, he placed his wedding band and patch from his uniform. The patch read, CDR Jeremiah Denton, and bore the anchor and the wings that marked him as a naval aviator. Commander Denton always removed these personal items before a mission. Doing so severed as a humble acknowledgement that there is a remote possibility of being shot down did in fact exist. No naval aviator, especially a veteran commander like Jerry, ever truly thought an enemy missile could catch him. On a ship, Jerry Denton was a good officer. In the air, he was an exceptional one. Like most military aviators, he felt best in a cockpit. The thrill ran through him as he closed his cabin door and set out on a day's mission. He had no doubt that he would put his rings back on when he returned that afternoon. Jerry's brown boots paced down the narrow passageways of one of the aircraft carriers USS the Independence. In the Navy, only aviators wore brown boots. Everyone else wore black. Jerry's distinctive boots were part of the trapping that built the spirit and ego of a Navy aviator. These men were special. The soft hum of machinery and a hiss of ventilation helped him relax and focus on the mission ahead. Another bombing runover of North Vietnam. He walked the familiar route to the flight desk, climbed the usual ladders, and reached the last bulkhead. He opened the hatch. Noise, fumes, sunshine, and heat immediately assailed him. Jerry shoved his helmet and pulled down the dark visor. Shoved on his helmet and pulled down its dark visor. He squinted against the brightness of the midday in the South China Sea. The summer sun roasted steel, concrete, rubber, and the men on the expansion fore-arc flight deck, which felt conspicuously like a frying pan. Sunlight gleamed off the blue water and white aircraft and the glass canopies. His helmet provided little defense against the canopy of jet noise. The moment a steam-driven catapult sent off an aircraft howling into the bowl, another aircraft would land near the ship's stern. It would ram its engines into full power in case its tailhook failed. It would ram its engines to full power in case its tailhook failed to snag one of the 4 arresting cables strung across the deck. The air trembled with a deafening noise. Heavy exhaust made the humid air thicker. Air crew wore wet bandanas to help them breathe. Jerry felt sweat break out instantly. He noticed heat seeping through his boots. He hastened to his A6 intruder, nimbly weaving through tailing traffic, jet blasts, and whirling propellers. Surviving on a flight deck was vital art he had to master. Jerry knew he could be killed more easily on a deck than in air. Jerry arrived safely at his assigned aircraft from Attack Squadron 75, nicknamed the Sunday Punches. He saw crewmen securing 14 Mark 82 500-pound bombs to the intruder's wings. To bear such a load, engineers had to make sure all weather-safe attacks aircraft a big one. To bear such a load, engineers had to make the all-weather attack aircrafts a big one. It weighed more than 60,000 pounds, 30 tons. It stood 16 feet tall. At 6 feet, Jerry's head barely reached the middle of the big plane in two distinctive gaping air intakes, which made the jet look like an oversized walrus missing its tusk. Next to the plane, Jerry felt small. In the cockpit, he felt powerful. No average pilot could handle such a beast as large and as fast as an intruder. Fly it off into a moving ship, then land it back on the ship in any day, any weather, day or night. In fact, Jerry and his fellow Navy flyers didn't even call themselves pilots. They were better. They were naval aviators, air warriors. They were invincible. Jerry and his bombarder navigator, Bill Tuscuddy, conducted their pre-flight checks. Then Jerry gingerly worked the throttles to taxi the intruder towards the bow. Past the ship's massive superstructure which bore a white 62 marking independence as America's 62nd aircraft carrier. A series of air crewmen in brightly colored shirts, goggles, and headphones guided Jerry to the catapult. Several men locked the intruder into the mechanism that would momentarily drag the plane down the deck and sling it off the bow as if it weighed nothing. Jerry Denton sat up at the tip of the mighty spear in his aircraft. He became an instrument of foreign policy. All the efforts of the U.S. Navy ultimately went towards launching him from this ship so he could drop bombs on an enemy target. Countless instructors have spent long hours training him. Veteran captains commanded their destroyers, submarines, and frigates to protect Jerry's aircraft. Every man aboard the Independence played a role in launching this heavy-laden plane off the deck with Jerry at the controls. Jerry and his fellow aviators existed at the very center of a loud, expensive, and highly dangerous enterprise. Many flight instructors warned students that the aircrafts would try to kill them. Pilots were always battling both their machines and physics, especially during the 1950s and 60s. They often lost. During Jerry's early career, longtime aviators had a 23% of dying in a crash, nearly half what you could expect during an emergency ejection. Yet these men each felt in total control and ascribed any crash to a mistake. Jerry didn't make mistakes. He always came home. From his cockpit, Jerry looked to his left and saw a yellow-shirted officer spinning his head in the air, signaling for full power. Excuse me. Jerry pushed the throttle forward. Behind him, his engines thundered. The intruder buckled against the locked catapult. Jerry checked his rudder, elevators, and ailerons. The surface that controlled his aircraft flight. All functioned perfectly. He gave a quick salute to the officer. He was ready. Jerry gripped the yoke with his left hand and the throttle with his right. The officer dropped to one knee and pointed his hand down the deck, giving the signal to launch. The catapult engaged. It yanked the intruder forward, and 3 seconds later, it slung off the deck at 150 knots or 170 miles per hour. 4 months earlier, in March 1965, the U.S. military had launched Operation Rolling Thunder, an air campaign designed to drop so many bombs on North Vietnam that its government would cease supporting the communist insurgents in South Vietnam. The operation was part of America's strategy to support the South Vietnam and contain communism. The political system that the American government perceived as the nation's greatest threat. The administration of President Lyndon Johnson believed in the domino theory, that communism would topple democratic governments like dominoes, one after the other, expanding the influence of China and the Soviet Union country by country across the Southeast Asia and the globe. Granted, the government supported by the U.S. and South Vietnam was neither democratic nor popular, but at least it wasn't under the influence of communist powers. Vietnam became the latest proxy in a conflict of the Cold War between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Jerry had flown more than 20 Rolling Thunder missions since the arrival of the North Vietnamese coast in June 1965, and grew more frustrated with each assignment. President Johnson and the Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, permitted bombing of only certain targets as they tried to deter and intimidate North Vietnam without escalating the conflict into an all-out war. They often selected targets like parking lots, bridges, and depots instead of strategic bases, factories, and ports. Jerry and his squadron mates felt like they routinely risked their lives for little gain. Thus far, Rolling Thunder had not deterred the government of the Communist Party chairman Ho Chi Minh in Hanoi. North Vietnam continued to support communist guerrillas known as Viet Cong in South Vietnam. By the end of 1965, America would have committed nearly 200,000 troops to the growing conflict. From his cockpit, Jerry could see little difference between North and South Vietnam. His shadow flickered over flooded North and South Vietnam. Flooded fields of rice in North Vietnam that looked like just like patties of South. By the end of 1965, America would have grown to have committed nearly 200,000 troops to the growing conflict. From his cockpit, Jerry could see little difference between North and South Vietnam. His shadow flickered over flooded fields of rice in North Vietnam that looked like just like the patties south of the demilitarized zone, or DMZ, the no man's land that separated the two countries just like south of the 17th parallel. He quickly found the Ma River and followed it inland towards his target, the Tan Ho Bridge, which was North Vietnamese and used to pump supplies south to the Viet Cong. Rainbow Leader, Jerry Radio, 27 aircraft arrayed behind him. Jerry Radio to the 27 aircraft arrayed behind him. Target at 10 o'clock. Rainbow Leader rolling in. Jerry pushed the yoke forward and nosed the intruder towards his bridge. Nearby. Jerry pushed the yoke forward and nosed the intruder towards the bridge and nearby battery of anti-aircraft artillery. His bombarder navigator, Bill Buscuddy, readied the ordnance. Suddenly, an explosion shocked the aircraft. Flames and smoke enveloped its wing. Warning lights flashed. The radio went dead. Another hit. The plane jerked and rolled right. Jerry stood up from his seat, jammed the left rudder pedal with such force that he snapped a tendon in his leg. Adrenaline masked the pain. The plane kept rolling. The engine stopped responding. Jerry lost control. He feared only seconds remained before the aircraft combusted. When intruder righted itself momentarily, Jerry punched Tuscuddy in the shoulder. "Time to eject," he signaled. Both men pulled their ejection handles. Tiny charges blew off the canopy. And a second later, Jerry and Bill rocketed up towards the ejection in their ejection seats. They left the air-conditioned quiet of the cockpit and entered the hot, cloudless sky boiling with explosions, and alive with noise. Jerry tumbled towards the air until his parachute deployed. He hung limply between the canvas dome and looked about. He watched as his crippled aircraft flying away from the trailing thick smoke. He saw Bill in the distance beneath an open chute. Below him, the lightly fostered ground, rapidly filling the infantry, came closer. Falling from one world into another, Jerry felt like Alice in Wonderland. Seconds before Jerry lost his aircraft, he planned to complete another routine bombing run and return to the Independence for a gluttonous evening meal served in linen tablecloths, followed by a steaming shower. He'd sleep in fresh sheets before the next day change the command ceremony, where he would assume leadership of the Sunday punchers. He would arrive home in Virginia Beach by Christmas. One explosion changed everything and shredded 2 decades of confidence and rendered his considerable ability and status as a naval aviator irrelevant. His sense of invulnerability crumbled. During the 30 seconds he estimated he had before landing, he thought of evasion and escape. Looking down, he observed that he'd land in the Ma River, which apparently was muddy enough to hide his swimming downstream. He'd splash down, the chute would collapse on top of him, and he'd strike out below the surface, swimming hard and surfacing far downstream. He'd hide in a riverbank bushes, lying submerged and breathing through a hollow reed overnight. The next day, he'd make his way down the coast, only 10 miles away, and signal for rescue. He'd be flying missions again by next week. Below him, uniformed enemy troops lined the riverbank. They watched him float helplessly towards him. His descent seemed to accelerate as he neared the river and his feet plunged into the muddy water. His whole body followed. The lit parachute seemed to just settle upstream. Below the surface, Jerry quickly freed himself from the straps and kicked off, heading downstream. With sudden horror, he realized his left leg wouldn't move. Until now, he hadn't noticed the severity of his injury. He had ruptured a tendon that, after the rough ejection, was now protruded through a gash in his skin and flight suit. His left leg was useless. His heavy flight boots began pulling him downward into the river-cold death. Panic replaced calm. Jerry kicked for the surface, gasped for air. He swallowed water and choked. He gasped and began sinking. His boots were too heavy. In that moment, survival came more important than escape. He inflated his life vest and shot to the surface. Looking around, he could see soldiers watching him from the bank. They waved him towards the shore, and one fired a shot over Jerry's head. No options remained except surrender. He could imagine nothing worse. Soldiers dragged Jerry from the brown water and stripped him of every item he had except underwear. They took his flight suit, boots, socks, weapons, radios, and watch. They left him wet, muddy, injured, and nearly naked, and bound with a rope. The accomplished naval aviator and father of 7 struggled to retain his pride. He felt much less like an American officer than he had moments earlier. Kneeling amid a gaggle of 30 soldiers, he first wondered when and what conditions he'd return to his family. He had no real idea what might lie ahead of him. Truthfully, he knew little about North Vietnam and even less about how the North Vietnamese treated American prisoners. He suddenly thought about what would sustain him through whatever lied ahead. He recalled a list of important quotations he would keep through his several college years at the Naval Academy. Now, facing an unknown test, several came back to him. "Nurture your mind with great thoughts," Benjamin Disraeli said. To believe in the heroic makes heroes. Jerry also recalled an anonymous quote that seemed to appropriate. "The greatest heroes known are the ones that are afraid to go, but go." Jerry was certainly afraid. He didn't have much choice about going, however. He could only control how he went, how he would conduct himself. He could choose how to respond to whatever came. Despite all he'd lost, he remained a man of faith and a naval officer. He resolved to show North Vietnamese what that meant. And that was a chapter from Captured, an American Prisoner of War in North Vietnam by Alvin Town.